Well, like it or not, and some of you may not like it, if you look at any kind of list of greatest Star Trek episodes ever, The Trouble with Tribbles is always going to be near the top. In terms of popular culture, it might actually be the most famous Star Trek episode of all, even though it was as goofy of an episode as any Trek series has ever featured. And I know a lot of people like to hate on cute in their favorite, sci-fi fantasy mythology, kind of like the Ewoks in Star Wars, but obviously some people like that kind of a thing. It's not the kind of thing that's my preference, but I don't mind it. Yeah, a little comedy is not going to hurt anyone, and it definitely didn't hurt this thing, as then 23-year-old college student and writer David Gerald struck gold when he came up with the idea for this episode, wrote it, and pitched it to the show. Well, it's not every day you get to hold a prop from one of the most famous sci-fi TV episodes of all time, but I did, so here it is. I don't care how ridiculous it is, but it was a legitimate thrill to do so. And this is a very rare specimen sitting in my hand too, yep, not just any old Tribble, but I'll explain that later. First, let's do a super condensed version of the history of the episode, because it's fascinating. Like I said, a 23-year-old comes up with the idea, thinking about his pet mice, among other things. But he didn't want to make it just pure comedy. He didn't think that would be true to the show, which he loved. So, quote, "My attitude was that it would be whimsical, but that we would have a serious threat," end quote. But there wasn't anywhere near enough seriousness in the episode for a man who happened to be the show's creator, Gene Roddenberry. However, some of Roddenberry's people had the right instinct on this. Producer Gene L. Coon came on just 1 month before the show came out, and Roddenberry was kind of burned out and overworked, and that seems to have left the free space for Coon to encourage Gerald to flesh out the pitch, which originally was called The Fuzzies, or A Fuzzy Thing Happened to Me, into a full episode. Story consultant Dorothy Fontana also thought the story was a good idea. Apparently, Coon really gave everyone free rein to make this as goofy as possible, so it ended up funnier and goofier than even the writer intended. No surprise a children's storybook came out of it, huh? But anyway, with the license to be much sillier than Roddenberry preferred, the cast really got in on the act. One person said that it was especially William Shatner that kind of leaned into this. Quote, "Bill was the one. He got into it. He realized, you know what, this is fun and we're having fun," end quote. And the final ingredient in the mix is the fact that Roddenberry was not present for filming. He was on vacation, so this is kind of like the class when the substitute teacher's in there. The sense of fun on set led to improvising and gags that were not in the script. A really good one is that when Shatner is buried in Tribbles here, the prop guy, on scene of course, and again unplanned, kept throwing more at him every few seconds. So if Shatner was not prepared for the kind of Chinese water torture of the bop, bop as he's trying to make his way through the scene. Might be why it's said people on set were laughing to the point of tears, off camera of course, and this is right when Roddenberry shows back up. I guess this is like the regular teacher then showing back up to the classroom unexpectedly at the worst possible moment. And now back to this guy. What makes him special, him or her special, is that, notice the tubing there, this Tribble is not like most. It can be animated, so to speak. Most Tribbles were just sewn up pouches of synthetic fur stuffed with foam rubber. Blowing air through the tube here allows this one to seemingly move independently. Not run around, of course, but show some type of movement. Pretty low tech, but it got the job done. Who needs animatronics when you can just blow into a tube? I guess I should say it might have been pumping air into the tube with some kind of apparatus. There were about 500 Tribbles made for the episode, handmade. The design came from Hua Chang, and Jacqueline Kumare, don't know how to pronounce those names, was paid $350 to make them. Using live animals of any kind was quickly ruled out as an option, and a fluffy keyring owned by Holly Sherman was the inspiration. A few of the Tribbles were made so that they could be capable of actual locomotion using moving dog toys, wind-up toys, I'm imagining. And then there were the breathing Tribbles, which had balloons inside, and I'm assuming the one I'm showing in this video is one of those. And we should also point out that this episode was so memorable that on the 30th anniversary of the franchise, Deep Space Nine, right in the middle of their 5th season, made the episode Trials and Tribble-ations. which did a great job of melding the current cast into the old episode. This episode was actually nominated for 3 Primetime Emmys. Who knew? It was very warmly received. I think at heart, this story is like one of, not this episode, the original. It's like a writing triumph. I'm running out of pictures to show, so here's something that really amused me. People have explained the anatomy of a Tribble. Anyway, yeah, this was not the studio or Roddenberry or somebody saying, we've decided we want a funny, cute episode with, something adorable, something that we can do a merchandising tie-in to. And then our writing team tried to come up with something that matches that target. This was an original idea by this very young writer. This was his first professional product. The first thing he ever sold. How amazing is that? And it had a lot of obstacles. Some people didn't, some people thought it was too ridiculous, like Leonard Nimoy, for instance, not just Roddenberry. All kinds of changes and cuts happened to the script. Nichelle Nichols told the writer, quote, "I've never seen a script go through so many changes and stay so much the same," end quote. So they're just tinkering and tinkering with it. There were multiple legal concerns where they thought they might be open to getting sued. But, of course, it finally got made and stood the test of time. Here's an amusing aside, in case you're wondering why I'm showing Freddy Krueger. Well, he was a friend of Gerald the writer, and he was there when Gerald hosted a bunch of friends, like 30, to watch the episode. And England, who, of course, later on would make a huge splash in pop culture himself, told him, quote, "I had no idea you were such a good writer," end quote. And Gerald responded, quote, "No one will remember this in 20 years," end quote. Amusingly ironic. So one last look at the Tribble I got to hold. A cute little piece of American sci-fi history. And not something easy to encounter in the wild, even though 500 were made. One, this is a more rare type, but also a lot of them just lost their fur over time. Just kind of fell apart. But this one's in great shape. Well, that's all. Live long and prosper.